There is a book that has sat on desks, in airport bags, on bedside tables, and in the hands of presidents and prisoners alike for more than 3 decades. It is not a book of tricks. It is a book of principles. And the strange thing about principles is that they do not care whether you believe in them. They work anyway. Tonight, I want to walk you through the whole of it, not as a summary, but as a story. Because Stephen Covey did not teach through theory. He taught through moments. A boy at a birthday party, a man on a subway, a father with a lawn, a woman with cancer, a prisoner in a cell. Let us begin. When the 25th anniversary edition was published, and again in the 2004 foreword, the argument was the same, and it was simple. The world had changed at a speed no one could have predicted. Technology, globalization, the collapse of old institutions. And yet the book had not needed rewriting. Why? Because it was never about the world. It was about the human being standing in it. Covey argued that timeless principles behave like natural laws. Gravity does not renegotiate its terms because you are busy. Neither does trust. Neither does integrity. You can ignore them, but you cannot break them. You can only break yourself against them. And he pointed to 9 obstacles that follow human beings across every century. The first is fear and insecurity, the quiet dread of losing the job, the marriage, the standing. The second is the itch of I want it now, instant everything, and the debt, physical and emotional, that follows. The third is blame and victimism, the culture of pointing outward at parents, at bosses, at the economy. The fourth is hopelessness, the cynicism that says nothing can change, so why try? The fifth is the absence of balance, the executive who wins the promotion and loses the family. The sixth is what's in it for me, the reflexive selfishness that poisons every table it sits at. The seventh is the hunger to be understood, the deepest human ache, and the least often satisfied. The eighth is conflict and difference, treated as a threat instead of a resource. And the ninth is personal stagnation, the slow rust that settles on a life that has stopped renewing itself. 7 habits, 9 wounds, and the claim that the first can heal the second. Jim Collins, who wrote about greatness in organizations, wrote about Covey the man. What he remembered was not the sales figures. It was the character, a man whose private life did not contradict his public teaching. And then there were the children. Covey's own children wrote a tribute that is more revealing than any biography, because it is made of small things. They remembered the day at the lake when a jet ski went wrong, and their father, without hesitation, went in after the person in trouble, and afterwards spoke about it as though it were nothing at all. They remembered a traffic jam, snarled and going nowhere, and their father getting out of the car and directing traffic himself, because someone had to, and no one else was doing it. They remembered elevator meetings, the way he would turn a 30-second ride into a real conversation with a stranger, asking a question that actually mattered. They remembered the motorcycle dates, each child taken out alone, one at a time, the whole world reduced to a father, a child, and the road. And they remembered the 20-minute affirmation tape, a recording he made and listened to over and over, describing the kind of father, the kind of husband, the kind of man he intended to become. He did not merely write about rescripting a life. He recorded his own and played it back to himself until it was true. That is the man. Now the method. Covey did something unusual for a business writer. He went to the library and read 200 years of American success literature, from the founding of the Republic to his own day, and he found a fracture line running right through the middle of it. For roughly the first 150 years, the literature spoke of what he called the character ethic: integrity, humility, fidelity, courage, justice, patience, industry, simplicity, modesty, the golden rule. Success was a byproduct of who you became. Then, in the last 50 years or so, something shifted. The literature became superficial. It spoke of the personality ethic, public image, positive mental attitude, techniques of influence, the right handshake, the right smile, the right way to make a person feel important so they would give you what you wanted. The difference matters enormously. Technique without character is manipulation, and people can smell it. As Covey put it, what you are shouts so loudly that no one can hear what you say. Here Covey introduced the idea that runs through the whole book, the paradigm, the map in your head, and he proved it with stories. He described watching a baseball game as a parent, and the struggle between how a parent sees a child and how the child sees himself. Two people watching the same event and coming away with two entirely different truths. Then the famous Harvard classroom experiment. Half the room is shown a picture of a young woman. The other half is shown a picture of an old woman. Then both halves are shown the same third image, the ambiguous drawing that can be either, and the two halves of the room argue, bitterly. Each side utterly certain, each side able to point to the evidence, each side sincere, neither side lying. They had simply been conditioned in 10 seconds, and 10 seconds of conditioning was enough to make two honest people call each other blind. And then the subway. A Sunday morning in New York, a quiet carriage. A man gets on with his children, and the children immediately begin running wild, shouting, grabbing things, disturbing everyone. And the father sits there, eyes closed, doing nothing. Covey, irritated, finally says something. And the man looks up as if waking, and says, quietly, that he supposes he ought to do something. They have just come from the hospital where the children's mother died an hour ago, and he does not know what to think, and he supposes the children do not know how to handle it either. Everything changed in a sentence. The irritation evaporated. Covey's whole way of seeing that carriage, his paradigm, shifted in an instant, and with it, his feelings and his behavior. He did not need a technique for patience. He needed to see correctly. Cecil B. DeMille, the film director, said of the 10 Commandments that we cannot break the law, we can only break ourselves against it. Covey built his principle-centered paradigm on exactly that, and he told the story attributed to Frank Koch in a naval publication. A battleship at sea in poor visibility. A light appears ahead on a collision course. The bridge signals for the other vessel to change course 20 degrees. The reply comes back, you change course 20 degrees. The captain, irritated, signals, I am a captain, change course 20 degrees. The reply, I am a seaman second class, you had better change course 20 degrees. Now furious, the captain signals, I am a battleship, change course 20 degrees. And the light signals back, I am a lighthouse. The captain changed course. Principles are lighthouses. Values are the maps you draw. A gang of thieves can share values. Only principles are permanent, and the closer your values sit to them, the more accurate your map. You cannot cram on a farm. You cannot forget to plant in spring, panic in summer, and demand a crop in autumn. Growth follows a sequence, and there are no shortcuts. Covey learned this in his own living room. His daughter turned 3, and at her party she sat surrounded by gifts, and other children wanted to play with them, and she refused. Flatly. Covey, embarrassed in front of guests, tried reason. Then he tried bargaining. Then he tried appealing to her sense of fairness. Then, quietly, he threatened. And finally, he simply took a toy from her hands and gave it to another child. And afterwards, he realized what he had done. He had wanted the sharing so that he would look like a good father. But a child cannot give away what she does not yet feel she owns. He had demanded a harvest from a field he had not yet planted. Real sharing grows out of a genuine sense of possession and security, and that takes time and patience and a parent willing to be embarrassed. 3 stages, and you cannot skip one. Dependence is the paradigm of you. You take care of me. You did not come through, I blame you. Independence is the paradigm of I can do it. I am responsible, I choose. Interdependence is the paradigm of we. We can combine our talents and create something neither of us could alone. Our culture worships independence and treats it as the summit. It is not. It is base camp. The 7 habits move you from the first stage, through the second, into the third, and you cannot be genuinely interdependent until you are first genuinely independent. A dependent person trying to cooperate is not cooperating, they are clinging. Effectiveness, Covey said, is not production. It is the balance between production and the capacity to produce. He called it P over PC, and he took the definition straight from Aesop. A farmer discovers his goose has laid a solid gold egg. Then another. Then another. He becomes rich, and then greedy, and then impatient. Why wait 1 egg a day? He kills the goose to get all the gold at once and finds it empty. He has destroyed the asset that produced the results. Every one of us has geese. Covey identified 3 kinds of asset. The physical asset. Think of the machine you never maintain because you are too busy running it, and the day it dies and takes your production with it. The financial asset, including the most important one of all, your own earning capacity, the mind and skill you never invest in while chasing today's income. And the human asset, which is the most fragile and the most valuable. He illustrated it with his own family. He had promised his daughter an evening out, a Star Wars film, just the 2 of them. And when the moment came, it was awkward, and she was not old enough to really follow the story, and he could have cut it short. He stayed. He sat through it, because the film was not the point. The relationship was the goose. He illustrated it in reverse with a restaurant, a place famous for its clam chowder, packed every lunchtime for years. Then it is sold, and the new owner focuses entirely on the bottom line and thins the chowder. For a while the numbers improve, costs down, profit up, and then, slowly, the customers stop coming. He killed the goose and read the first few golden eggs as proof of his own brilliance. And he illustrated it in the workplace with what he called the macho management approach. The manager who looks at employees he considers lazy and tightens the screws, demands, threatens, squeezes out short-term production, and destroys the willingness, the loyalty, and the initiative that produced it. Golden eggs today, dead goose tomorrow. We begin with the most fundamental claim in the entire book. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. Covey began by dismantling the social mirror, the idea that we know who we are by reading the reflection others give us. The opinions, expectations, and paradigms of the people around us, projected onto us until we mistake them for our identity. And he laid out the 3 great deterministic theories, each of which explains you away. Genetic determinism, it is in your DNA, your grandparents did this to you. Psychic determinism, it is your upbringing, your parents scripted you. Environmental determinism, it is your boss, your spouse, the economy, the government. Each is a stimulus response model. Something happens, you react, like a dog. And then he told the story that broke the model. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist, was imprisoned in the Nazi death camps. His family was killed. He was stripped of everything, clothes, name, dignity, and every conceivable freedom. His captors controlled his entire environment and could do anything they wished to his body. And in that place, naked and alone in a small room, he became aware of something he later called the last of the human freedoms, the one thing they could not take. They could control his circumstances entirely. They could not control how he chose to respond to them within himself. He began to exercise that freedom. He imagined himself lecturing to students after the war about what he had learned in the camps. He became, in his own mind, freer than his guards. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. In that choice lie our growth and our freedom. Covey backed it with Eleanor Roosevelt's observation that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, and with Gandhi's line that they cannot take away our self-respect. if we do not give it to them. Notice the word in both. Consent. It is not what happens to us that wounds us most. It is our permission for what happens to us. He described a woman confined to a wheelchair, cared for around the clock by a devoted nurse, and utterly, professionally miserable. A woman who had made her suffering her identity and her weapon, and who was, in her own way, a full-time employer of everyone's guilt. And against her he set Carol, a woman with cancer, dying, who took the diagnosis and refused the script. She would not be acted upon. She spent her remaining time strengthening her family, encouraging others, choosing her response week after week while her body failed. Same helplessness, opposite life. Act or be acted upon. Covey once ran a conference for the home improvement industry in the middle of a brutal recession. The mood in the room was funereal. The market had collapsed, and everyone was waiting to be rescued. He asked them to stop discussing what was being done to them and start listing what was within their power. And by the end, a room full of victims had turned into a room full of operators, with a list of moves nobody had bothered to think of because everyone had been busy being a casualty. Listen to the language. Reactive language. There's nothing I can do. That's just the way I am. He makes me so angry. They won't allow that. I have to. I can't. Proactive language. Let's look at our alternatives. I can choose a different approach. I control my own feelings. I will choose an appropriate response. I prefer. I will. Covey told of a student who wanted to attend a tennis tournament and said, plainly, I have to go. And Covey pushed him, no, you do not have to. You are choosing to go and choosing the consequences. Say it honestly. The student resisted because honest language forces responsibility. I choose to go to the tennis trip and I choose to accept the consequences of missing the class. Suddenly, it is a decision, not a fate. And there is the couple who come to him and say the love has gone. Covey asks, then love her. But there is no feeling anymore. Then love her. You do not feel it. Love her. Love, he says, is a verb before it is a feeling. The feeling is the fruit of the action. Proactive people make love a thing they do. Reactive people wait for it to be done to them. The circles. Draw two circles. The outer one, the circle of concern, holds everything you care about, the economy, the weather, the national debt, your teenager's attitude. The inner one, the circle of influence, holds the things you can actually do something about. Reactive people pour their energy into the outer circle. They talk about the weaknesses of others, about problems they cannot touch, about circumstances. And the result is that their circle of influence shrinks, because energy spent outside it is energy not spent inside it. Proactive people pour their energy into the inner circle, and the inner circle grows. He divided problems into 3 types. Direct control, problems involving your own behavior, solved by working on habits 1, 2, and 3. Indirect control, problems involving other people's behavior, solved by working on habits 4, 5, and 6, the methods of influence. And no control, problems you can do nothing about, where the solution is to change the line of your mouth, to accept them genuinely and gracefully, and learn to live with them. He told of an executive working under a president who was dictatorial and difficult. Everyone else complained in the corridors. This one man chose differently. He studied what the president needed, anticipated it, brought him not problems but analyzed options, and quietly made himself indispensable. Within a while, the president was consulting him on everything. He had not changed the president. He had grown his own circle until it enclosed him. And he reached back to Joseph in Egypt, sold into slavery by his own brothers, imprisoned on a false accusation, and yet in every setting, from Potiphar's house to the prison to the palace, working from the inside out, becoming so trustworthy that the ruler of each place put everything in his hands. He described a quarterback taught to snap a wristband after a mistake, a small physical act to cut the reactive spiral and reset, so that one bad throw does not become four. And then he issued a challenge. 30 days. Take the 30-day proactivity test. For 1 month, work only in your circle of influence. Make small commitments and keep them. Be a light, not a judge. A model, not a critic. Part of the solution, not part of the problem. Do not blame and do not accuse. And watch what happens to the circle. Covey opens this habit with an exercise, and I want you to actually do it as I speak. Picture yourself driving to a funeral. You park, you walk in, and you see the flowers, the soft music, the faces of people you have known all your life. And you walk to the front, and you look into the casket, and you are looking at yourself. This is your funeral 3 years from today. 4 people will speak. 1 from your family, 1 of your friends, 1 from your work, 1 from your church or your community. And now the question, what would you want each of them to say? What character would you want them to have seen? What contributions would you want them to remember? Whatever you just answered, that is your definition of success. And most of us have never once written it down. The law of 2 creations. Everything is created twice. First mentally, then physically. The house exists in the blueprint before it exists in the timber. The problem is that if you do not consciously make the first creation, someone else will make it for you, your family script, your culture, your employer. That is design versus default. You either write the script or you perform one that was handed to you. Leadership versus management. Picture a group hacking a path through a jungle. The producers are swinging the machetes. The managers behind them are writing procedures, sharpening blades, running training programs, improving efficiency. And the leader is the one who climbs the tallest tree, surveys the whole scene, and shouts down, "Wrong jungle." And what do the busy, efficient producers and managers shout back? "Be quiet, we're making progress." Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. And it is entirely possible to be superbly efficient at climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. Covey described an oil company executive in Seattle who realized his days had been consumed entirely by logistics, the operational firefighting that felt urgent and productive. He deliberately withdrew from it, delegated the machinery, and spent his time on the tree instead. Direction, culture, the future. It felt at first like doing nothing. It was the first real leadership the company had had. Rescripting. Anwar Sadat had been raised and scripted into a deep hatred of Israel. He had, in his youth, been imprisoned, and in solitary confinement in cell 54, he learned to withdraw into himself, to observe his own thinking, to detach from his own scripts. Years later, as president, that capacity allowed him to do the almost unthinkable, to walk into the Israeli Knesset and change the script of a region. He had learned that a man who cannot change the very fabric of his thought will never be able to change reality. And Covey applied it to something far smaller and far more familiar, the parent-child overreaction cycle. The child does something. The parent, running an old script inherited from their own childhood, overreacts. The child reacts to the overreaction. The parent escalates. Nobody is choosing anything. 2 scripts are simply playing each other out. Rescripting means someone stops and writes new lines, personal missions, statements. He shared the creed of Rolf Kerr, a personal constitution of commitments, to succeed at home first, to seek and merit divine help, never to compromise with honesty, to hear both sides before judging, to seek counsel from others, to defend the absent, to be sincere yet decisive, to develop one new proficiency a year, to plan tomorrow's work today, to keep a sense of humor, to be orderly in person and work, not to fear mistakes, but to fear the absence of creative response to them, to help those under him succeed, and to listen twice as much as he speaks. And he shared the mission statement of a working mother, built around balance, the constant negotiation between the demands of home and work, written not as a fantasy of perfection, but as a set of priorities she could return to when everything pulled at once. Alternative centers. Whatever sits at the center of your life becomes the source of your security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Covey listed the usual candidates. Spouse-centered, and your emotional life rises and falls entirely with one other person's mood. Family-centered, and your identity depends on your family's reputation and your children's behavior. Money-centered, and every decision is measured in profit, and a threat to income is a threat to the self. Work-centered, and you are not a person, you are a job title, and retirement is a bereavement. Possession-centered, and your worth fluctuates with fashion and comparison. Pleasure-centered, and the appetite grows while the satisfaction shrinks. Friend-centered or enemy-centered, and you are steered by acceptance, or worse, steered by opposition, letting the person you hate dictate your every move. Church-centered, mistaking activity for spirituality, the label for the life. Self-centered, the smallest center of all. Against all of these he set the principal center, the only center that does not shift, does not die, does not leave, and does not depend on how anyone else behaves. And he tested them with a scenario. It is evening. You have promised your spouse a concert. Your boss calls and needs you to work late. A spouse-centered person caves to the spouse or seethes. A money or work-centered person cancels the concert without a second thought. A pleasure-centered person goes to whichever is more fun, but a principle-centered person is not being pulled by any of them. They step back, weigh the whole picture, consider the promise they made, the real needs of the work, the long-term consequences, and they choose. And having chosen, they are at peace, because the decision came from within, not from whoever pulled the hardest. Using the whole brain. Covey pushed the reader towards visualization and affirmation, the right brain tools. He described his son Sean, playing football, mentally rehearsing plays over and over, seeing himself perform under pressure long before he stepped onto the field. Performance follows imagination. And he took the same idea into organizations. He told of the IBM training culture, where service was so deeply embedded that when a customer in a remote location needed a machine part and the roads were impassable, the company sent a helicopter, because the mission statement was not a plaque, it was a reflex. And of the Ritz-Carlton style of service culture, where staff at every level were trusted and expected to solve a guest's problem on the spot, because the shared mission had actually been shared. The key, he insisted, is involvement. No involvement, no commitment. A mission statement written by an executive on a weekend and handed down is a memo. A mission statement built by the people who must live it is a constitution. Habit 1 says you are the programmer. Habit 2 says write the program. Habit 3 says run it, and running it is where most of us fail. Covey quoted E.M. Gray, who spent his life looking for the common denominator of success, and concluded that it was not hard work, or luck, or human relations, though all of them matter. It was this: successful people have the habit of doing the things that failures do not like to do. They do not necessarily like doing them either, but their dislike is subordinated to the strength of their purpose. 4 generations of time management. The first generation is notes and checklists. The second is calendars and appointments, planning ahead. The third is prioritization, goal setting, daily planning with A1, A2, B1. Each was an improvement, and the third generation was also where things went wrong, because it made people so efficient at scheduling that they lost sight of whether any of it mattered, and it squeezed the life out of spontaneity and relationships. The fourth generation is different. It does not manage time, it manages self, and it works from this matrix. The time management matrix. 2 axes, urgent and not urgent, important and not important, 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important, crises, pressing problems, deadline-driven projects. This is necessity, and it is real, and some of it is unavoidable. But a person who lives here is consumed by it. Quadrant 1 grows until it fills everything, and the only escape becomes Quadrant 4. Quadrant 2 is not urgent but important. Prevention, relationship building, planning, recognizing new opportunities, preparation. Renewal. This is the quadrant of effectiveness, and it is the heart of the entire habit. Nothing in it will ever shout at you. Nothing here has a deadline. It must be chosen deliberately every single time. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. The ringing phone, the interruption. Some meetings, some mail, some reports, many pressing matters that are pressing for somebody else. People who live here mistake urgency for importance and spend their lives reacting to other people's priorities while believing they are busy. Quadrant 4 is neither urgent nor important. Trivia. Busy work. Time wasting. Escape. Effective people stay out of 3 and 4 entirely, which is where the time for 2 comes from. Not from 1, but from 3 and 4. The shopping center manager. Covey described working with the manager of a shopping center who was buried in Quadrant 1 and 3, endless calls, endless fires. He was persuaded to invest a small, protected portion of his week, around a third of his time, into Quadrant 2, building genuine relationships with the tenants of his center, understanding their businesses, helping them succeed. It felt like a luxury he could not afford. Within a period, tenant revenues rose sharply, the relationships transformed, and the fires largely stopped starting. He had stopped fighting problems and started preventing them, learning to say no. The only way to say yes to Quadrant 2 is to say no to something else, and usually to something urgent and popular. Covey's wife, Sandra, was invited to serve on a committee doing genuinely good work. She looked at what she had already committed to, and what mattered most to her, and she declined, warmly and without guilt. Not because the committee was bad, but because a bigger yes was burning inside. He described a university professor who wanted to write, and who took the proactive route. He blocked writing time as an unbreakable appointment with himself, and told his department that during those hours he was simply unavailable, the same as if he were teaching a class. The writing got done because it had been given the protection that only urgency usually receives. Weekly organizing, not daily planning, weekly, because the week is the natural unit of a human life. Identify your roles: individual, spouse, parent, manager, community member. Set 2 or 3 important goals for each role for the coming week. Then schedule those goals into specific days. Then adapt daily as reality intrudes. You are not scheduling priorities, you are prioritizing your schedule. Spontaneity. He told, honestly, of the trouble a rigid schedule can cause. His son had planned a day down to the minute, every activity accounted for, everything optimized, and it collided head-on with Carol and with the human beings involved who did not wish to be items on a timetable. The lesson: the schedule serves the person, not the other way round. When a relationship needs an hour that the plan did not allocate, the plan yields delegation. Here Covey drew the sharpest line in the chapter between 2 kinds. Go for delegation is go for this, go for that, do what I say, and tell me when it's done. He illustrated it perfectly. He is out on the water taking photographs, water skiing, and he wants to hand the camera over at exactly the right moment. And he is shouting instructions. Take it, no, take it now, a man micromanaging a single button press. That is gopher delegation, and it does not scale because you remain the bottleneck for every decision. Stewardship delegation is entirely different. It focuses on results, not methods. And the great illustration is a lawn. Covey wanted his young son Stephen to take responsibility for the lawn, not to mow it on command, to own it. So he trained him thoroughly. He walked the yard with him and defined the desired result in the boy's own words: green and clean. Green like the neighbor's lawn, and he showed him the neighbors, and let him decide how they would get water on it, hoses or buckets or spit. It was his choice, so long as it was green. Clean meaning no mess, no paper, no debris, and he had the boy look at half the yard cleaned and half not, so he could see the standard himself. Then he laid out the guidelines. Do not turn on the sprinklers when people are on the grass, and do not use the neighbor's water without asking. Then the resources, hoses, a bucket, and Dad, if Dad was available. Then accountability. Twice a week, we will walk the yard together and you will report to me, and you will judge how it is going. And then consequences. This is tied to the whole family budget and the whole family's enjoyment of our home. And then he let go. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The lawn turned yellow, rubbish accumulated. Covey burned to intervene, and he did not, because he had made an agreement, and taking it back would have taught the boy that responsibility is theatre. On the appointed day they walked the yard, and the boy, seeing it through his own agreed standard, broke down. And he asked, quietly, will you help me? And Covey said, what was our agreement? Dad helps if Dad has time. He had time. He picked up one bag of rubbish at his son's request and put it where his son directed. And from that day, the boy owned the lawn. He would remind the family to stay off the grass. He had become, in that small kingdom, the manager and not the errand boy. That is stewardship delegation. It takes far longer at the start, and it multiplies you forever after. Covey ran a seminar on the Oregon coast, and during a break, a man came to him, troubled about his marriage. He said, essentially, my wife and I have no feelings for each other anymore. What do I do? He wanted the quick fix, the technique, the sentence that would repair years in an afternoon. And there is no such sentence. You cannot talk your way out of a problem you behaved your way into. The public victory rests on the private victory, and nowhere is that more brutally true than in a marriage. The emotional bank account. This is the most useful metaphor in the book. Every relationship has an account. You make deposits through courtesy, kindness, honesty, and keeping commitments, building a reserve of trust. You make withdrawals through discourtesy, disrespect, overreaction, betrayal, and broken promises. When the reserve is high, communication is easy and instant, and mistakes are absorbed. When the account is overdrawn, you walk on eggshells, every word is measured, and the smallest thing detonates. And in long-term relationships, a marriage, a family, the account requires constant deposits because expectations continually renew and the account continually evaporates. It is not a one-time investment. He named 6 major deposits. 1. Seeking to understand the individual. What is a deposit to you may be a withdrawal to someone else. You must learn what matters to them. Covey told of a friend whose son had no interest in the things the father valued, but who loved baseball. And so the father took his son on a 6-week trip across the country to see a game in every major league city. An enormous expense of time and money, and when someone asked whether he loved baseball that much, he said he did not, but he loved his son that much. That deposit was still paying dividends decades later. And he told of a professor and the miniature Great Wall of China, a man who, to reach a particular person, built something intricate and specific to that person's world, because a general gesture would have meant nothing and a particular one meant everything. 2. Attending to the little things. The small kindnesses and courtesies are enormous. The small discourtesies and unkindnesses are enormous too. Covey remembered being out with his sons, and Sean, the younger one, growing tired and cold as the evening drew in. He took off his coat and put it around him. Small, barely a moment. And his son remembered it and mentioned it years later. Inside every adult is a very tender child. 3. Keeping commitments. Breaking a promise is a massive withdrawal, and after a broken promise, people simply stop believing the next one. 4. Clarifying expectations. Almost all interpersonal difficulty is a conflict of unstated, ambiguous expectations about roles and goals. Making them explicit up front feels awkward and saves years. 5. Showing personal integrity, which Covey defined most sharply as being loyal to those who are absent. If you defend a person who is not in the room, the people who are in the room learn that you will defend them too. 6. Apologizing sincerely when you make a withdrawal. And he told his own story here, and it does not flatter him. He was working, needing quiet, and his son David was pounding on a door. Covey lost his temper and came down on the boy hard, only to discover that his brother was on the other side of the door, bleeding, and David had been desperately trying to get help. He had punished a child for an act of love. What could be done then except to apologize, sincerely, fully, without excuse? It takes a great deal of character strength to apologize quickly, and weak people cannot do it because they are too frightened of what it costs them. Love and life. Covey told of a school dean, a man in a difficult relationship with his son, who had spent years giving love on condition, conditional on grades, on behavior, on the son becoming what the father wanted, and who finally, painfully, made the decision to love unconditionally, whatever the son chose to become, and to communicate that. The transformation in the son, once he no longer had to fight for approval, was profound. Unconditional love gives a person the security to be themselves, and paradoxically, that is when they begin to grow. He cited Dag Hammarskjöld's line, that it is nobler to give yourself completely to one individual than to labor diligently for the salvation of the masses. And he applied it to himself, in a clash of administrative styles with his own right-hand man in the organization. It would have been easy to keep it professional and distant, to write the man off as difficult. Instead, he sat down, over hours, and worked it through until they had a genuine understanding, the one relationship, rather than the abstract masses. And he told of a department store where a manager treated a customer with such care over a difficult problem, losing money on the transaction, that the customer became an advocate for life. The immediate golden egg was sacrificed. The goose was fed. Covey once consulted for a company in Bermuda that had built its culture around a racehorse chart, a great board displaying every salesperson as a horse racing towards a finish line, with everyone's position visible to all. Competition, visibly, publicly, permanently. And it worked, in the way such things work. It produced a handful of winners and a great many people who had quietly decided they could not win and had stopped trying, and who had every incentive to withhold help from one another. He asked them to consider cooperation instead, because in an interdependent reality, competition inside the organization is a tax on everybody. 6 paradigms of human interaction. Win-win agreements and solutions are mutually beneficial. Life is a cooperative arena, not a competitive one. Win-lose, the racehorse chart. My way, I win, you lose. This is the paradigm most of us were scripted into by school grades, sports, and family comparison. Lose-win, I lose, you win. Peace at any price. This is not kindness. It is capitulation, and it buries resentment that surfaces later in disproportionate rage or in illness. Lose-lose, the paradigm of the vengeful and the stubborn. Covey told of a divorced man ordered by a judge to sell his car and give half the proceeds to his ex-wife. He sold a car worth several $1,000s for $50 and handed her $25. When she protested and the court investigated, they found he was systematically doing the same with every asset. He was willing to lose everything as long as she lost too. Some people are so consumed by an enemy that blindness sets in. When no concern for the other party at all, I simply get mine. And the 6th, win-win or no deal. If we cannot find a solution that genuinely benefits us both, we agree respectfully to disagree, no deal. And this is liberating, because it releases you from the need to manipulate, and it keeps the relationship intact. Covey lived it. He was negotiating a training program with a bank, a substantial contract, and by the time the details were clear, the arrangement was not going to serve them both properly. He walked away from an $84,000 contract because the alternative was a deal in which one party would eventually feel cheated, and that deal would have cost more than it paid. He also described lose-win in a lease negotiation with the owners of a shopping mall. The tenant who concedes and concedes to keep the peace, and the slow accumulation of resentment that eventually poisons the whole arrangement. 5 dimensions of win-win. The first is character, resting on 3 traits. Integrity, the value we place on ourselves, which comes from keeping commitments to ourselves. Maturity, and here Covey used Aitran Saxenian's definition from Harvard Business School. The balance between courage and consideration, the ability to express your own feelings and convictions, balanced with consideration for the feelings and convictions of others. High courage and low consideration produces win-lose. High consideration and low courage produces lose-win. Both, together, is win-win. And the third trait is the abundance mentality, the deep conviction that there is plenty out there for everybody. Its opposite, the scarcity mentality, sees life as a single pie. If you get a large slice, there is less for me. Scarcity-minded people find it very hard to be genuinely happy at the success of others, even people they love. The second dimension is relationships, the emotional bank account, without which win-win is impossible. The third is agreements, explicit, written where necessary, covering desired results, guidelines, resources, accountability, and consequences. The fourth is systems, because you cannot ask for cooperation while rewarding competition. Covey told of a company running a sales rally system where the top 40 out of 800 salespeople were celebrated as the winners, and the other 760 went home as the audience. The system was changed so that every person who met their own agreed-upon goal was recognized, and the number of achievers went from 40 to 800 without pitting anyone against anyone. He also told of a retail operation where department heads earned commission, and where the practice of creaming had taken hold, heads competing to grab the customers most likely to buy, poaching from one another, sabotaging the store's total performance in pursuit of individual numbers. The people were not villains, the system was. The fifth dimension is processes, and Covey said the process of win-win is habit 5, which we come to next, and he gave 2 more illustrations. The bank that needed to train its management trainees, running a 6-month program with poor results. Covey's team introduced learner-controlled instruction, clear objectives, resources, and self-paced accountability, with each trainee responsible for demonstrating mastery rather than sitting through a schedule. The program was compressed from 6 months to around 5 weeks, with better outcomes and higher morale. Win for the bank, win for the trainee. And at home, a win-win agreement with his 16-year-old daughter about the family car. Not a list of rules imposed by a father, but a negotiated agreement. What she wanted, what he needed, the guidelines, the resources, and the consequences, agreed together and understood by both. The agreement did the supervising. The father did not have to. Imagine you go to an optometrist because your eyes are troubling you. He listens for 10 seconds, then takes off his own glasses and hands them to you. Try these, I've worn them for a decade and they work wonderfully. You put them on and everything blurs. He says, that's strange, they work for me, try harder. You say you cannot see. He says, well, think positively. Would you go back? And yet this is exactly how most of us give advice. We prescribe before we diagnose. Empathic listening. Covey laid out the levels at which we listen. Ignoring, not really listening at all. Pretending, yeah, right. Selective listening, hearing only certain parts. attentive listening, actually paying attention to the words. And then, rarely, the fifth level, empathic listening, listening with the intent to understand, getting inside the other person's frame of reference, seeing the world as they see it and feeling as they feel. And he was careful to distinguish it from sympathy. Sympathy is agreement and pity, and it makes people dependent. Empathy is understanding. You can understand a person deeply and still disagree with them entirely. He told of a real estate negotiation in Chicago where a deal was stalling because each side was busy defending its position. When one party stopped and genuinely set out to understand the other side's constraints, their actual pressures, their real needs, the shape of the deal changed, and it closed. And he told of a football game. He was at a stadium, and a man came to find him about his baby, Jenny, who was sick, and the medical situation had to be understood before anything could be prescribed. The diagnosis had to come first, urgently, before any action could be right. Prescription before diagnosis is malpractice in medicine and in every relationship. 4 autobiographical responses. Because we listen from within our own life story, we respond in 4 predictable ways. We evaluate, we agree or disagree. We probe, we ask questions from our own frame of reference. We advise, we give counsel based on our own experience. We interpret, we explain a person's motives and behavior based on our own. Covey wrote a dialogue between a father and a son, and it is painfully recognizable. The son says school is for the birds. The father says, "Well, what's the matter, son?" The son says, "It's totally impractical. I'm not getting anything out of it." The father, alarmed, begins the standard performance. "I felt that way at your age, but look how it worked out. You have to stick with it." And the boy shuts down, and the conversation is over, and the father never learns that the boy is thinking of dropping out. Then he rewrote it with empathy. The son says school is for the birds. The father says, "You're feeling that school isn't working for you." And the boy, feeling heard, opens the next layer, and the next, and eventually says what he was actually afraid of, that he cannot read well enough, that he has been carrying it in secret. Covey described exactly this with his own son. The empathetic conversation that finally surfaced the trauma of a reading test score, the humiliation the boy had never spoken about, sitting under everything else like a stone. 4 developmental stages. He gave a practical path. First, mimic content, repeat back what was said. It is mechanical, but it forces you to listen. Second, rephrase the content in your own words. Third, reflect the feeling. Fourth, and best, rephrase the content and reflect the feeling together. And then, as understanding grows, the technique disappears and only the caring remains. And if you use the technique without the caring, people will find it insulting, and rightly so. Then, to be understood. Covey reached back to the Greeks, ethos, pathos, logos, and the order matters enormously. Ethos is your personal credibility, the trust people have in your integrity. Pathos is the empathic side, the alignment with the other person's emotional frame. Logos is the logic, the reasoning, the presentation. Most of us go straight to logos. We lead with the argument. The Greeks knew you must earn ethos, then establish pathos, and only then does logos land. When you can present your idea in terms of the other person's frame of reference, better than they can themselves, your credibility is total. Synergy means the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and it is not a mystical idea. Nature does it constantly. Plant 2 saplings close together, and their roots intertwine and improve the soil, and both grow better than either would alone. Put 2 pieces of timber together, and they hold far more than the sum of what each holds separately. Synergy is what happens when habits 4, 5, and 6 come together. Win-win intent, empathic understanding, and then creative cooperation that produces a third alternative. Not my way, not your way, but a better way that neither of us had thought of before we started. The classroom. Covey taught a university leadership class, and one semester the group achieved something unusual. The energy in the room built until the students collectively decided the syllabus itself was inadequate for what they were discovering, and they rewrote it. They abandoned the planned structure, restructured the projects and the grading, and the class ended up compiling and publishing a book of their own findings. Nobody had planned it. It could not have been planned. It emerged, the mountain retreat. He described taking an executive group away to create a corporate mission statement, and the moment when the discussion stopped being political and became honest. When people said what they actually believed rather than what was safe, and the statement that emerged had a life in it that no committee draft ever has. The insurance company. A planning meeting that was going nowhere because everyone was protecting their position. The solution was anonymity, anonymous white papers, so that ideas could be evaluated on merit rather than on rank. Once the authorship was removed, the honesty arrived, and with it the real problems, and with them the real solutions. Trust and communication. Covey pointed to David Lilienthal, who chaired the Atomic Energy Commission, and who took a group of fiercely independent and mutually suspicious individuals and spent many weeks, to the impatience of everyone watching, doing nothing but building relationships among them. Getting to know each other, learning each other's backgrounds and values. It looked like an indulgent waste of national time. The result was a commission of extraordinary cohesion, capable of a level of creative disagreement that saved years later on. He mapped 3 levels of communication. The lowest is defensive, low trust, low cooperation, careful legal language, win-lose or lose-lose. The middle is respectful, mature people, polite, and the best available outcome is compromise. 1 + 1 = 1.5. Nobody lies, nobody grows, everybody settles. And the highest is synergistic, high trust, high cooperation. 1 + 1 = 8, or 16, or 1600. And the test of synergy is your reaction to difference. If someone disagrees with you and your first thought is good, you see it differently. Help me see what you see. You are in synergy. If your first thought is you are wrong, you are in the basement, the family vacation. Covey told of a man who wanted to take his annual holiday, as he always had, to a lake fishing with his sons, while his wife wanted to visit her ailing mother, hundreds of miles away, who might not have long. 2 apparently incompatible needs. Compromise would have meant half a holiday and half a visit, and both of them unhappy. Instead, the couple talked, properly, each seeking to understand. And what emerged was a third alternative neither had considered at the start, built out of what each of them actually needed underneath the position they had stated. That is synergy at a kitchen table, intrapersonal synergy. He described a company president in Orlando who was frustrated by a facts versus feelings divide with his wife, his analytical, left-brain approach colliding with her intuitive, emotional one. Over a long lunch conversation, and by working through it deliberately, they discovered the 2 modes were not enemies, but the 2 halves of a complete decision. Synergy begins inside one person, between the 2 halves of one mind, before it can happen between 2 people. The animal school, and Covey included the old fable. The animals decide to found a school, with a curriculum of running, climbing, swimming, and flying, and every animal must take every subject. The duck is a superb swimmer and a poor runner, so he is kept after school to practice running until his webbed feet are ruined, and he is only average at swimming. The rabbit, brilliant at running, has a nervous breakdown in swimming class. The squirrel, magnificent at climbing, is exhausted and frustrated by flying, where he is taught to start from the ground. The eagle is a problem child, disciplined severely, because in the climbing class, he insists on reaching the treetop his own way. And at the end of the year, the valedictorian is an abnormal eel who can swim moderately, run a little, climb a little and fly a little, and has average marks in everything. Standardization destroys strength. Synergy celebrates difference, the deadlock. Covey described a real estate developer locked in a legal battle with a bank over foreclosure. Lawyers on both sides, positions hardened, enormous costs mounting, and a collision course towards a court case that would destroy value for everyone. The two principals were persuaded to sit down, and before arguing, to listen, to actually understand each other's real financial position and constraints. And once each side genuinely understood the other, a solution appeared within hours that neither legal team had conceived in months, because the legal process had been organized around winning rather than around solving. Covey opened with a man in a forest, soaring at a tree, exhausted, having been at it for hours and getting nowhere. Someone suggests he stop and sharpen the saw, it would go much faster. And the man, without looking up, says he does not have time to sharpen the saw. He is too busy soaring. Habit 7 is the habit that makes all the others possible. It is quadrant 2 at its purest, because nothing in it is ever urgent, and everything in it is the foundation, and it operates in 4 dimensions, the physical dimension. Endurance, flexibility, strength, exercise, nutrition, stress management. This is the one nobody has time for and everybody pays for. Covey noted the resting pulse rate as a simple index of aerobic fitness. As the heart grows more efficient, it beats less often at rest, and the body carries stress better. And he told the bench press story. Working out with a friend, going through the sets and reaching the point of failure, the point where the muscle says no more. The friend keeps saying, one more, one more. And it is at exactly that point, the point past comfort, that the muscle fiber actually breaks down and rebuilds stronger. Growth happens at the edge of what you thought you could do, but only if there is a spotter and only if there is rest afterwards. Push past the edge, then recover. That is the whole principle of renewal in one image. The spiritual dimension. This is your core, your center, your commitment to your value system. For some it is meditation and scripture. For some it is music or literature or immersion in nature. Covey noted Martin Luther, who reportedly said that he had so much to do that day that he must spend the first 3 hours in prayer, the man with the least time investing the most. And he told Arthur Gordon's story, The Turn of the Tide, a writer whose life had gone flat, whose work had dried up, who went to his doctor. The doctor examined him, found nothing wrong physically, and gave him instructions. Spend tomorrow at the beach, the place you were happiest as a child. Take no reading material, no writing, no radio, no company. And take 4 prescriptions to be opened at 9, 12, 3, and 6 o'clock. At 9, the first prescription said, listen carefully. 3 hours of listening to the sea, the wind, the birds, and eventually to the quiet inside himself. At 12, try reaching back. Reaching back into memories of joy, into the happiness he had buried under years of routine, and finding that the reserves were still there. At 3, examine your motives. And here it hurt, because he found that his motives had drifted, that what he had once done for love and service, he now did for reputation and income, and that this, exactly this, was why the work had gone dead. And at 6, the last prescription, written in the wet sand at the water's edge, write your worries on the sand. He wrote them and turned and walked away, and the tide came in and took them. The mental dimension. Most of our mental development comes from formal education, and when that stops, most minds atrophy. Covey was blunt about the television, the sheer number of hours a household will hand over to it, and the difference between using it as a servant and being used by it. Against that he set reading good literature, deliberately and systematically, a book a month building to a book a week, and writing, keeping a journal, because writing forces clarity, and a person who writes about their experience learns twice from it. and organizing and planning as mental exercise in itself. The social and emotional dimension. These two he treated together because our emotional life develops primarily out of our relationships. And the crucial point is this: your intrinsic security does not come from the world's treatment of you. It comes from within, from an accurate paradigm, a correct center, and a life of integrity where your habits reflect your deepest values. It also comes from anonymous service. Doing something useful for another person that no one will ever trace back to you, which produces a quality of security that no amount of recognition can. He quoted George Bernard Shaw on the true joy in life being used for a purpose you yourself recognize as a mighty one. The being a force of nature, rather than a feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. And then he came to scripting others, the act of reflecting back to a person not who they are, but who they can become. He took his illustration from Man of La Mancha, where Don Quixote encounters a woman the world has thrown away and insists on calling her Dulcinea and treating her with the courtesy owed to a lady. She fights it. She rages against it because the new script is more painful than the old one. And slowly, because someone held a different mirror up to her, she begins to live into it. He set beside it a true story from an English school where a computer error scrambled the class assignments. A group of ordinary students were mistakenly labeled as gifted, and their teachers, believing the labels, taught them as though they were exceptional. And by the end of the year, their results had risen dramatically. When the error was discovered, the administrators did not tell the teachers immediately. They asked what had happened. And the teachers said the students were brilliant. They had simply had to teach differently, ask more, expect more. The children had not changed. The mirror had. Force field analysis. Covey borrowed Kurt Lewin's model. Any current level of performance is an equilibrium between driving forces, positive, logical, economic, pushing upwards, and restraining forces, negative, emotional, cultural, illogical, pushing back. Most people try to change by increasing the driving forces, and the restraining forces simply push back harder, and the spring recoils. The habits, particularly 4, 5, and 6, work instead by loosening the restraining forces, by converting them into driving forces through involvement and understanding. That is how a new level is reached that does not snap back. Balance and synergy in renewal. The 4 dimensions are not independent. Physical renewal strengthens your mental work. Spiritual renewal strengthens your social capacity. Neglect one and you weaken all. And when they are practiced together, they compound. The upward spiral. Growth is not a circle. It is a spiral, and it moves along 3 points repeated at ever higher levels. Learn, commit, do. Learn, commit, do. And the compass for the spiral is the conscience, the inner faculty that senses whether we are on course. To move meaningfully upward, we must educate the conscience and then obey it. And each cycle of obedience brings us to a level where the next thing we must learn becomes visible. Covey ended with his own story, and it is the most personal passage in the book. He and his family spent a sabbatical year in Hawaii, living in a modest arrangement beside the sugar cane fields, with the deliberate goal of stepping out of the machinery of life. He had an office at the university, and each day he would go to the back of the college library and read among the shelves, undisturbed, unhurried, in a way that modern life almost never permits. And one day, reading there, he came upon a paragraph, 3 sentences, essentially, that reorganized his entire life. The idea that between stimulus and response there is a space, and that in that space lies the freedom to choose, and in that choice lies growth and happiness. He read it again and again. He walked out among the cane fields, stunned by its simplicity and its enormity, and it became the foundation of everything he later taught. He and Sandra used that year to talk in a way most couples never manage. They would put the children in the care of arrangements and ride out on a red Honda 90 trail cycle along the cane fields, slowly, talking for an hour or two at a time. And they made two ground rules for those conversations. The first was no probing. You do not interrogate. You do not press for what a person is not ready to say. The second was quit when it hurts. The moment it became too painful for either of them, they stopped and returned to it the next day. And in that space, over months, they went places they had never gone. Covey admitted to being fascinated and puzzled by what he called Sandra's Frigidaire obsession. Her insistence, faintly irrational to him, that appliances of one particular brand were simply the right ones, a position she defended with an energy the topic did not seem to warrant. And through those slow, unprobing conversations, they finally traced it, back to her father, and to his years in the appliance business, and to a difficult stretch when the company that stood behind him carried him, and to a childhood spent hearing her father's loyalty and gratitude at the dinner table. It was not an opinion about refrigerators. It was a daughter's love for her father, wearing a very odd disguise. That is what is underneath most of what we argue about, and that is why Habit 5 exists. The transition person. Covey closed with the idea that gave the book its final weight. Many of us inherit scripts we did not write, tendencies to anger, to withdrawal, to criticism, to abuse, handed down through generations of a family like a piece of furniture nobody chose. And any one of us can be the person who stops it, the transition person, the one who absorbs the destructive script and does not pass it on, who breaks the pattern and hands the next generation something better than they were given. That is proactivity at its most consequential, not choosing your response to a bad morning. Choosing your response to 100 years of inheritance. Near the close of his life, Covey answered the questions he was asked most. On the difference between principles and values. Values are what we hold dear, and every person and every organization has them, including destructive ones. Principles are natural laws, external to us, that govern consequences. Values govern behavior, principles govern the results of behavior. The aim of a life is to value principles. On why the habits resonate universally across every culture and religion he encountered, because they are not his. He did not invent them. They are common to every enduring wisdom tradition, and people recognize them because they already, quietly, know them. On integrity being higher than loyalty, because loyalty, when it becomes the highest value, will eventually ask you to lie for someone. Integrity, held higher, is what makes your loyalty worth having. On the 8th habit and the knowledge worker age, that effectiveness is no longer enough. The new demand is greatness, to find your voice, and to inspire others to find theirs. In an age where the value of a person is what they know and create, the old industrial model of managing people like things is not merely unkind, it is economically absurd. On strategic recruiting, that the most important decision a leader makes is who comes in the door, and that hiring should occupy far more of a leader's attention than it usually does, because a great hire makes management largely unnecessary. On leaving a legacy with children, through the leader in me, the work of teaching the habits to children in schools, because it is far easier to build a child than to repair an adult. And finally, on living life in crescendo, the idea that your most important work is always ahead of you. That however much you have achieved or lost, however old you are, however finished the world thinks you are, you do not decrescendo. You do not coast. The music builds. Right to the last bar. 7 habits. Be proactive. Begin with the end in mind. Put first things first. Think win-win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Synergize. Sharpen the saw. 3 of them make you independent. 3 of them make you effective with others. And the 7th keeps the other 6 alive. But if you take one thing from all of this, take the paragraph he found in the back of that library in Hawaii. Between whatever happens to you and whatever you do about it, there is a space. It may be very small. It is always there. And everything you will ever become is built in that space.